Hello. Welcome to the Tea with Jamie podcast. It is May 12th, 2026, and I just recorded a podcast and just sort of gave up halfway through. And the reason being, I want to talk today about the proposed changes to the 2026 regulations for the 2027 season. And I was finding myself really regulating what I was saying to protect the feelings of the hyper-emotional people on the internet who are crying about the current regulations. And I was being so delicate to not offend people's sensibilities. And I was like, what am I doing? We are where we are. And I understand people being passionate about the sport. I'm passionate about the sport. But every time I make some piece of media about the power units or anything that I find interesting about the new regulations or any kind of element with the ICE or with the MGUK or whatever, I get the most emotional, reactive people in the comments losing their goddamn minds. And I was finding myself regulating what I was saying to try not to trigger these people. And it's so silly, It's so silly. I equate talking about this stuff to watching a movie. Now, I love racing. I love watching the races. I love watching the overtakes and the starts and the strategy calls and the pit stops and, all the visceral Formula One action on track is just great. Just like watching a movie. But then there's a whole other side of enjoyment for me of how it all happens. So I also like watching the sort of behind the scenes making of the movie too. And that's sort of a different enjoyment side of my brain. And so when I talk about how the power units work or the regulations or the tweaks and then the feedback and then the adjustments that need to be made, it's all from a perspective of, isn't this interesting? It's not my job to come up with these ideas. It's not my job to fix the problem. I'm just there as a fan watching what's going on, with my popcorn, watching the whole thing unfold. And so I am a little surprised when just talking about these things from an interested third-party perspective, this wall of negativity comes down and just tries to crush everything, crush all discussion. No talking about it. It's just bad. No more talking. And it's just weird. It's weird and it's unnecessary. If you just want to watch the movie and watch the race and not think about anything else, absolutely fine. I'm happy for you. Do it. Everyone's got a busy life, right? Just watch the race, go back to your life, and then whatever. If you don't like the way things are going, well, that's Formula One, constantly changing. I mean, Formula One is evolving race to race, let alone season to season. And there are periods where it's great. There are periods where it's not great. There are periods where it's exciting and where it's really dull. And just like any sport, you have to take the rough with the smooth, So I'm not going to restrict my thoughts or discussions or inquisitiveness or interest in the behind-the-scenes nature of Formula One because it triggers some people. So, stop listening from now on if that's a problem. That's your problem, not my problem, okay? So, you have control over what you consume. You exercise that control. Do it. That's not to say you can't have a dissenting opinion. I have plenty of those. But don't try and crush conversation because of that. Anyway, to get off my soapbox, I'm going to actually now talk about what I wanted to talk about before, and that is the proposed changes to the 26 regulations for 2027. So let's talk about the problems without losing our goddamn minds, right? So predominantly, the drivers don't like it and the fans don't like it when the entire focus is on battery saving, right? Energy saving and conservation, and not racing. Let's be honest, that's the crux of the issue. There are sub-issues within that, like, for example, the lift and coast, or the super clipping, or the push-to-pass overtakes. But all of that comes back to the electrification of Formula One and how it is now half of the power output, essentially, of the power unit. And because you have to think about the energy source, because it's a ever-replenishing energy source, it is now taking up so much of the drivers and the commentators and the fans' thinking throughout the course of the weekend, not just the race, the weekend, qualifying, race, everything. So if you boil down the changes for 2027, it is trying to shift that in the favor of the internal combustion engine, so the electrical has less impact on all of it. Now, it doesn't have to be a big shift in order for the effects to be big. And you can see that with the changes they brought in for Miami. They reduced the amount the teams are allowed to harvest per lap in qualifying, well, and in the race, but in qualifying, which was the problem, so that they were restricted by how much they could focus on it. They reduced it from 8 megajoules to 7 in Miami. And so they could only recharge a certain amount throughout the lap, so they had to do it in the appropriate places, and then the rest of the time they could push. And they just had the energy that they had, and when it ran out, it ran out. They also increased the amount that the cars could recharge at the recharge time, so that period was shortened. So those are quite good tweaks. It reduced the amount of time that recharge was happening and limited the amount that recharge was allowed to occur. So therefore now you're taking down the amount of both time and thinking energy that goes into the electrical side of Formula One. But for 2027, they're proposing going further. And they're proposing that by literally reducing the output of the electrical side and increasing the output of the internal combustion side. Not by a lot, but if you reduce it one way and increase it the other way, the swing is significant. Significant enough. So let's talk about the electrical component first, because it's super easy. They're just going to turn it down. They're going to turn down the output. They have infinite control over the electrical output. It's very, very easy to change. It's just a line of software, right? A line of code in software. So they're going to turn that down by 50 kilowatts. That's about 67 horsepower. Now, to make it relevant between the internal combustion engine and the electrical side, everything is discussed in kilowatts, so you can get that sort of relative understanding of the power output of both sides. So 50 kilowatts down for the electrical. Now they're going to increase the internal combustion engine by the same amount, so up 50 kilowatts or 67 horsepower. So that's essentially 134 something horsepower swing toward the internal combustion engine. Now in a 1,000 horsepower power unit, that's a fairly significant swing. And the way they do that with the internal combustion engine, as I talked about the other day, is they increase the amount of flow of fuel through the engine. Bigger bangs, more frequent bangs, more power out. Now with that, of course, you use more fuel. So the tracks where there is the highest fuel consumption, they might have to reduce the length of the race. Because for some of these car manufacturers, they don't have the space with the packaging to increase the fuel tank. So they just can't run out of fuel. You can't punish them because that's how they design the car to these regulations. So in my mind, that's not the end of the world if we lose a few laps of the race. Ideally not, but just being practically speaking, okay, we lose a few laps. Fine. That's fine. If all the laps of the remaining laps are better, that's a good compromise to make. So that's the long and short of the big changes for 2027. Turning down the electrical, turning up the internal combustion engine. And if you reduce that influence of the electrical comparatively to the internal combustion, everything cannot help but improve, right? All the issues are on the electrical side, so you reduce that and you increase the other side, we should reduce the impact of the electrical. Is it enough? It doesn't matter. It can't be more. They cannot redesign the power units and the entirety of the cars by next year. This seemingly is the maximum that was agreed by everyone. And we'll get onto the quote in a minute. So that's what's happening next year. I think there are going to be further tweaks throughout this year to make the current power unit split of effectively 50-50 better. And there are places like Baku. Monza, I think, is less of an issue, surprisingly, but there are reasons for me saying that. But Mexico, like that last fiddly section, not a lot of recharge happening there, and then that whacking Great Long Straight. A little bit concerning. Qatar even, not a lot of heavy stopping zones in Qatar, if we end up going there, depending on what's happening in the Middle East. So there are going to probably need to be further changes to the deployment and the recharge and all that kind of stuff. So by this time next year, all of the 2026 changes will have been made, the shifts to the power unit will have been made, and hopefully all this hair on fire discussion about the battery, the recharge, blah, 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 is less of a thing, and we're just kind of going back to the movie, right? We're just focusing on the on-track action. As much as I do like the behind-the-scenes discussion. All right, so let's get to the FIA statement. A number of proposals to introduce hardware component changes to the F1 2026 regulations were agreed in principle at an online meeting convened today by the FIA and attended by team principals, FOM, and representatives from power unit manufacturers. Today's meeting began with a review of the amendments introduced for the Miami Grand Prix before discussion moved on to longer-term regulatory considerations. All right, so they looked at the changes. Sorry, this is back to me. They looked at the changes for Miami and they were like, okay, cool. Seem to have worked. Are we fixed? Are we done? No. But they seem to have made a significant impact, heading in the right direction. And that also informs how they're going to approach further changes throughout the season. Okay, back to the quote. The conclusion from the deployment of modifications in Miami designed to improve safety and reduce excessive harvesting was that they resulted in improved competition and were a step in the right direction. Following analysis and consultation, the FIA reported that no material issues or safety concerns had been identified from Miami. Evaluation of the Miami package is ongoing with a view to the introduction of further adjustments at future events. These include improved start safety revisions and measures to improve safety under wet conditions. These will be communicated to teams once defined. Improvements to the visual signalling measures are being evaluated for the Canadian Grand Prix. Okay, so I basically say what I just said. All good, and they've got an eye to further changes moving forward, as well as changes immediately for the Canadian Grand Prix with visual signalling measures. And I don't know exactly what that is. I don't know if that's to do with lights for the harvesting or in wet weather. I believe that was an issue in discussion. I know that Lewis Hamilton did a tyre test in the wet, I believe, with one of these cars, and I think he made a lot of suggestions to the FIA for how to tweak these power units, because we haven't seen these cars in the wet yet. And given the torque, immediate torque under their right foot, it could be disastrous. So I think having driven them in the wet, Lewis made some suggestions and they're probably going to implement them. Back to the quote. Turning to the long-term measures. There was unanimous commitment to introduce changes which further enhanced fair and safe competition that were intuitive for drivers and teams and were in the best interests of the sport. The measures agreed in principle today for 2027 would see a nominal increase in internal combustion engine (ICE) power by 50 kilowatts, with a fuel flow increase and a nominal reduction of energy recovery system ERS deployment power by 50 kilowatts. So what we said, increase the internal combustion and decrease the MGUK electrical power. Back to the quote. It was agreed that further detailed discussion in technical groups comprising teams and power unit manufacturers was required before the final package was decided. The final proposals presented during today's meeting are the result of a series of consultations over the past few weeks between the FIA and multi-stakeholders with invaluable input from F1 drivers. The next step is to formally present these regulatory changes, once refined, for a World Motorsport Council e-vote once the power unit manufacturers will have voted on this package. So, some things that jumped out to me was that the drivers had an input. The next step is that the power unit manufacturers have to agree to these changes, and then once that's all done, Motorsport Council e-vote happens, and then it's all locked in. But it sounds to me like everyone is on board, and it's just a sort of process that has to go through to lock this in. Now, of course, the moment it's locked in, and I'm sure beforehand, all these power unit manufacturers are investigating what this actually means and planning on making the changes, that's when they can go to work preparing for next year. Because bigger changes can't be made before then, as Lauren Meckes said the other day, actually. So yeah, is it perfect? Probably not. But that swing in favor of internal combustion over electric seems to be the absolute right way forward. And with the tweaks that have already been made and the tweaks yet to come this season, I'm hoping that this time next year, things will be in a much better place. Now, I'm an optimist. I wasn't ready to just call this a disaster, and I'm still not ready to call it a disaster. It's not a disaster. What drives me nuts is when Domenicali comes out and says there are 0 problems with Formula One this year, and everybody's happy. I mean, that's mad. Obviously, that's not the case. And I don't believe he believes that. Because all of a sudden, all these changes are being made and plans for next year are being renewed. So clearly there's a problem and they know there's a problem. So it makes him look silly to even say that. But at the same time, let's not go completely the other direction and say it's a total disaster, because it isn't. 4 rounds and at least 3 decent races, you know? Japan's never great, let's be honest. It's a really difficult track, and it was made all the worse with the cars running out of juice through 130R. That was so depressing. And I was worried about that. I think I said that on a video prior to it happening. But if some major issues can be ironed out or reduced to the point of it not being overtly significant anymore, and the fact that there are definite steps in the right direction with the reduction in weight and size of the cars and the reduction in dirty air, I've seen enough to be optimistic about the future. And the fact that we may be returning to V8s in 2030 or 2031. That's very exciting. Are we going to get V8s next year or the year after or the year after that? No. So stop beating yourself up over that and wishing it was the case, because it's pointless. It's not going to happen. So let's just be a bit more pragmatic, you know? What I do love is that we are seeing teams come closer together. However, Mercedes have not had a major upgrade package yet, and they are due one next week. It is happening next week. This, I think, more than anything, is going to determine what the rest of the season is going to look like. If they show up next week and just demolish everyone, I think we're in for a dominant season by Mercedes, and everyone's fighting over the scraps. And that's not great for Formula One. If they show up with improvement, and McLaren shows up with improvement, and Ferrari get their head around the updates that they had in Miami, and Red Bull continue their quite fast development, which, to be fair, they really made huge strides in Miami, I think we're in a pretty good place, right? That's like 8 cars fighting. And then there are some midfield battles, and Audi and Cadillac might be a little mini battle at the back there. irrespective of the cars slowing down a bit here or the nitpicking the types of overtakes that are occurring, the bigger picture, this could be a very competitive season. If Mercedes don't come out and absolutely blow everyone out of the water, because I don't really want that. If I'm being completely honest, for the sport, I don't want one team running away with it. I didn't like that in 2023. I didn't like that when Mercedes were just winning every race in that sort of Hamilton-Rosberg era. Like Max's first win in Barcelona when the Mercedes took each other out was a fantastic day for Formula One. It was such an exciting race because the domination era didn't play a part. I don't think, unless you're really a fan of the one team and that's all you care about, I don't think dominant eras are particularly fun or particularly healthy. So that's what I'm hoping, if I'm honest, is that Mercedes, I'm happy for them doing well, particularly after all these years in the doldrums. But yeah, anyway, I am really rambling on. So this is my second episode of today. My first one's going to be thrown in the bin. But that was the long and short of it in terms of the 2027 regs as quoted by the FIA. And so, we'll see what happens. I'm going to remind myself to just talk from my perspective, because that's what this is all about. I'm not Mr. Guru Formula One. I'm just a fan who has opinions and has a podcast. Everyone's got a podcast. So, that's where I am on it all. So have a great day. I will be back again tomorrow with something maybe a little more substantive rather than just opinion-based. And I will see you then. Okay, bye-bye for now. I've been your host, Jamie Muffett. You can find me on social media for more of this rambling nonsense under my name or F1_Jamie. This is an RPS audio production.